Five Nights at Freddy's is one of the biggest horror game franchises in the world. Most horror games come with a feat of lore. In this case, it's a story. However, if you have never played FNAF or even heard of it, be warned, the lore in this game is tremendously hard to crack, especially when MatPat couldn't decipher the code for Cassidy's name. Knowing this, today, I'm going to try to solve every single mystery that still stumbles into the FNAF community.
But first, there are some ground rules to pull in. One of them is that this is a theory, meaning that this idea is backed up by evidence. This also means that nothing is correct in this video. However, we do not wish to give out false information to new people. The second is that we don't want to change the perspectives of what happens in the lore of the franchise. Again, these are only ideas and not an entire full-on intake of what would happen. So do not go on rambling in the comment sections to fight me about these theories. With that in mind, let's begin.
Starting in FNAF 1, there aren't many mysteries to discover, as Scott did not plan to make any lore for the game until later in the franchise. This was because this was going to be his final game after receiving incredibly disappointing reviews. However, there is one to discuss, and that is when the first MPI happened. This can be solved by Count 4B, which there is a rules poster that sometimes changes into newspapers that line up the MCI or the missing children incident, being the first in all of the years of the Fazbear franchise. The first clipping reads out 2 local children vanishing at Freddy's, and so this means that these were the first 2 children to get killed in the safe room of the original Freddy's location. We also know the date, as later in that clip it reads out June 26. We can then use the books as evidence, from the Fazbear Fight Stories and novel trilogy being 1985. We can then connect these dates to make the date that the MCI happens, which being June 26, 1985.
Our second question that stumped many in the community is who got charged and convicted. We know it cannot be William, otherwise that would conflict with the second clipping, which is that the suspect was charged and convicted, meaning he would be arrested until the later years of FNAF, which we know is impossible because there would have to be later deaths in the franchise. However, there must be one issue that could retcon this, being that he could have been released in a few years, but we don't think this way. The games take place in Hurricane, Utah. In Utah, there's a huge death penalty for being a child murderer. Because William killed 5 children, he would already been dead before the events of the second MCI. Therefore, it would have been someone related to the company. Because in the clippings, they find out the murderer is using a Spring Bonnie suit to lure kids into the safe room. Only employees would know about Spring Bonnie and the safe room, so they most likely got an employee.
Another question that becomes a hassle in the community, and important, is FNAF 1 before or after Sis location. We know by using the minimum wage for the year that FNAF 1 takes place, which is 1993. However, we have never got a single date for Sis location in any way. By looking into FNAF 3, we could see in the end sequence of the night minigames that William dismantled the FNAF animatronics. We know that he was trying to experiment with the remnant and agony and fuse them to make the molting MCI, to then break them apart into the funtime animatronics. This means that FNAF 1 was already closed down for the rental service to be put up, with 10 units lying in Sis location when you enter the bunker.
Allow me to fill this somewhat frightening silence with some light-hearted banter. Due to the massive success, and even more so the unfortunate closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, it was clear that the stage was set, no pun intended, for another contender in children's entertainment.
He refers to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza as FNAF 1, not the 1987 or 1985 location. Later in the line about this, he refers to the clear stage as the rental service, not Circus Baby's Pizza World, because that was post-83, due to the bite victim. We know that Sis location is after FNAF 1 because for Sis location to happen with the remnant injected from the OG animatronics or the FNAF 1 animatronics, this means William had to go down to the FNAF 1 location to dismantle the animatronics because he wanted to test with the remnant.
Last mystery for FNAF 1 is what was the order for the MCI deaths. This has been a debate for a very long time and never had to be found out until Help Wanted 2 was released. In Princess Quest 4, there's a grave section that deeply gets cut into the minigame. In VR, you are supposed to light the gravestones in order, and the core members of the Fazbear Gang's dolls sit next to each one. So when lighting them in the right order, you could get the Bonnie mask. The order is Susie, Fritz, Gabriel, Jeremy, and then Cassidy, because the dolls tell us which numbers they are. The last is Charlie, which leads me into a debate about FNAF 2.
With the release of FNAF 2, this was when Scott picked up on the theories, such as the money given in 1987 that exactly correlates to the minimum wage in that year. He started making the timeline a little more confusing, yet it doesn't make much of a big hassle. He figured out that it was a prequel to FNAF 1 and it was after Fredbear's.
But then came a very huge debate. Was Charlie's death first, or was that the retcon? We figured out about Charlie's death, which was also a correlation to the Midnight Motorist minigame. In the flies, it is called Later That Night, possibly hinting towards Charlie's death. Yet we aren't too sure enough. We found out that Charlie does not die at the same time as the other missing kids. And that also answers another question. Charlie died at Freddy's, not Fredbear's. Fredbear's would have been closed by then, and as we discussed, the MCI order was the Core 5 and then Charlie. The Core 5 would have not been dead until the start of Fazbear's.
Why does Charlie not die at the same time as the other kids? This was because, as shown in the Give Gifts, Give Life minigame in FNAF 2, we see the puppet giving life to the dead children's bodies and then moving them to the respective animatronics. If the dead bodies had already been there, that means the puppet was not there for the murders to already have been done.
Another raised question in FNAF 2 is, was the building on lockdown when Jeremy Fitzgerald was still working there? Yes, but there are some problems with this. We know that the phone calls were pre-recorded, as to the one line that he makes on the first night.
Hello and welcome to your new summer job at the new and improved Freddy Fazbear's Pizza.
He says, welcome to your new summer job. But as of FNAF 1, the game takes place in the second week of November, which is barely even close to being a summer job. But the building was on lockdown due to William's doing.
As mentioned in Night 6 of FNAF 2, he says that someone used one of the suits in the back, which we all know the spring bodysuit. He also says a new day shift guard position has just opened up, implying that William was fired from the company for shoving that old suit, and now Jeremy was going to take on the role. There was one last scheduled birthday party until business was going to go out, due to all the incidents at that second location. The second MCI happened way before Jeremy was hired, around the times that phone guy mentioned a summer job. So we could place FNAF 2 in the timeline to be established around springtime. It wouldn't take a time to kill those innocent children for the summer night shift to be a job. This could be further backed up by evidence such as the fact that when Foguy says it was a summer job, the animatronics were already possessed, making the reason why he calls.
But the most important out of all of these questions is if Fritz Smith is Michael Schmidt. We know for certain that Michael Afton is Mike Schmidt in FNAF 1, since in the security logbook, Mike draws on a page about having nightmares. That drawing was Nightmare Fredbear, which was an experiment only Michael Afton had experienced.
There isn't much evidence that Michael Afton is Fritz Smith's, but there is a little piece that can make it completely true. In both games, when completing the hardest challenge with all animatronics set to the highest difficulty, you get the message prompting a fake note, "You're fired." Because this happens in both games, Fritz Smith is most likely Mike Schmidt, meaning Mike Schmidt is also Michael Afton. But why would he do this? It was because he was trying to undo his father's wrongdoings, or that he was cleaning up his father's mess, trying to satisfy William with what happened with the bite of 83. But in both ways, he sets the toy animatronics free and leaves the old withered in the back.
For FNAF 3, a very green monotone style game based on only one animatronic that possesses the killer that was there many years ago, the Happiest Day minigame has also left the community stumped in their shoes. If you didn't know, the Happiest Day minigame is the last minigame after completing all other minigames on the other nights. This being the 5th night, FNAF 3's Happiest Day probably happens right after the FNAF 6 fire, and not FNAF 3's fire. This was because the FNAF 3 fire still had the Molten MCI, later now referred as Molten Freddy. If the puppet let the souls pass on when Molten Freddy still needs to be caught in that FNAF 6 fire, who would be possessing the remnant? No one. So this idea wouldn't make sense during FNAF 3.
FNAF 3 also sparks up a new security guard, or do they? That brings me to another reception in the community. Who do we play FNAF 3 as? Many think it's Hudson, the protagonist of Fazbear's Frights 8, Gumdrop Angel. The third story of it being What We Found, Michael and Henry Emily. From one, we could rule out Henry Emily, Henry does not have any correlation to FNAF Frights because in copyright you could use names and slogans from and to Fazbear Entertainment, meaning that some random teenagers or men decided to look to the FNAF 1 location decided to run a business under any trademarks.
If that were true, Henry would have no motive to go through the Fazbear horror attraction because there was no point other than William. And from there, Hudson can be ruled out. The creator of the game, Scott, says that the books are not connected in the same timeline as the games. However, the books have some ideas that are implemented into the games, such as FNAF 3, but of course Hudson is a book character and not a game character. Using the security logbook for more evidence on the page for FNAF 3 shows Foxy, and for every other page for showing a new chapter, it shows the same. This can heavily imply Michael because he is associated with Foxy as shown in FNAF 4.
And unfortunately, this video is running out of time for me to save it for part 2. There's still a lot more to discuss. If you would like to see it, like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you later.